Hello everyone. This video is going to focus on integrating sources and provide a brief overview on understanding how to incorporate or integrate what we call sourced material. So the first thing to understand is to understand why we would use other people's information, other people's writing, books, scholarly work, essentially why we would turn to other people's ideas and concepts in order to put them into our own writing, or in this case for you, why you would integrate them into your writing. There are many ways and reasons why we would do that, but for this stage of writing and academic writing, primarily there are four main reasons why we would integrate sources, okay? So the first is to consider background information. Now, with background information, it's primarily just to focus on that alone, meaning you're not trying to interpret anything, meaning you're not trying to use the information to prove a point, that you are not trying to use it to support anything. Background information is to give context. It is to provide solely facts. The reasons why you would provide facts would be presented in your paper. And then also to give you credibility. So essentially, it lets us know as a reader who's reading your work that you understand and are well versed in the information that you are about to talk about. So for example, if you were writing a research paper, or let's say you were, quote, entering a conversation about a particular topic, because there are so many different parts or ways to talk about something, we need to know through background information what specifically about the topic that you are going to address, okay? So the next is exhibits. Exhibits is essentially the next level, right? So once you get information, the exhibits asks you to analyze, right? To analyze, to interpret, meaning you're going to present this information for your readers, and then you're going to provide your interpretation of it. That's one way to do it. Now, remember that interpretation is yours, meaning that it's your perspective, it's your understanding to the best of your ability, and making sure that you are not taking things out of context, of course. But ideally, the exhibit's role is for what we call primary sources, meaning firsthand accounts of something. So that could be, it could be somebody's journal, it could be a photo, it could be a tweet, it could be somebody's social media account, meaning those are the first-hand accounts of those people. They're presenting it. And what you would do is take that information and then analyze it. Now, the reasons why you're analyzing it would be present in your paper. That's why you would incorporate this outside information. Maybe you're not analyzing it, but maybe you want to interpret it. So for example, the Constitution is heavily used as outside sourced information, right? And people, if let's say, for example, we're talking about gun rights, they would incorporate the Constitution and that amendment for interpretation, okay? So that would be an example. Now, another reason for exhibits is for evidence, right? Proof that something exists. So for example, if you wanted to make the argument that a particular political leader believes something or holds a certain ideology, and your readers are wondering, how do you know? Well, you would provide an outside source, or an exhibit in this case, that shows that. And that could be a tweet, that could be maybe an interview that they had, and you would incorporate that as evidence to show that this person believes this to be true, right? So that is exhibits. The next reason why is argumentative. Okay, so this is primarily done when we are writing argumentative papers, or when we are wanting to prove something, take a stance, when we want to show support, persuade, so many different reasons, but ultimately there is a reason for argumentative purposes. Now, with this kind of information, it is solely designed to do several things. One, to show the conversation that's being had, right? So what does the person say? What are you going to present first that you're going to argue against, right? Or to debate against. So that would be different than background information, because background information is not designed to be presented for argumentative reasons. Whereas with argumentative outside sources, it's designed specifically so that way you are bringing backing up the debate points, right? And so that's why you would bring the outside source. So for example, let's say that you wanted to argue a particular political leader's viewpoints about, let's say, a specific gun right or gun law or something of that nature. And you are not going to bring in background information about what the gun laws are, because that's not the conversation what you want to have. The conversation you're trying to have is for argumentative purposes. So what you would actually bring in is what the person says, right? What were the talking points for you to even have this debate or discussion? So that's what you would bring in. Another one is so you can refute, argue against. Maybe you want to refine their points. Perhaps maybe you bring up a tweet or something like that, or maybe an article or a scholarly work, for example, in which a person is making an argument themselves, and you want to maybe agree with parts of it, but refine other parts, okay? Another is to build upon the knowledge. So maybe you feel like somebody has made and presented a really strong argument, right? And you want to build on that and extend their ideas further. So you would bring that information in. And then finally, another is to agree, right? Or to affirm them, to validate, say, yes, this person's argument is strong. Here's why. And then you would bring this information. Now, these are often what we call secondary sources, because anytime you're arguing something, right, it's being filtered through someone else's interpretation of something. And so that's why the secondary sources. Now, keep in mind that when you are arguing in a paper, for example, you might incorporate in your paper background information. You might incorporate exhibits, and you might incorporate sources for argument. It really just depends on the purpose of the paragraph, right? So the paragraph that you're writing and why you're writing it is going to dictate how or why you're going to integrate that information. So let's say, for example, if you were writing a much larger argumentative essay, for example, and you wanted to present how you understand and know information, you can start with a background. Start with demonstrating your understanding of the information, right? And then if you wanted to, you can bring in another paragraph exhibits. So maybe you are trying to interpret your understanding and demonstrate that, and then you lead into your argument later. So keep in mind that just because you use one doesn't mean you're not going to use all of them or different ones. You can. It's just important to understand why you're using it and what's the purpose, because that's going to dictate how it's going to be integrated in your paper. We'll talk about that here shortly. Finally, you have methods. Method is essentially dealing with things like definition, terminology, concepts, presenting those. For example, so you have a working definition. So for example, if you were writing a paper about feminism or something like that, feminism has different interpretations of what it means, different definitions. And so the method is that the way you're going to approach this paper. And so you would present the definition of feminism from whoever, scholar that you're working with. Or you can also explain processes, and how you are going to analyze. So basically, this would be done at the beginning of your paper. You're going to explain to your readers something along the lines of how you're going to be analyzing and interpreting exhibits, so the earlier points. Okay, so now that we have a general idea, if you see the kinds of material, so what does it look like? So ultimately, under background information, you have things like encyclopedias, a dictionary definition that goes for methods as well. For exhibits and evidence, they're kind of similar. So you have things like artistic work, observations, reports, articles, contemporary reviews, historical documents. So it really depends on how you're using it, of course. Argumentative sources would be things like scholarly work, opinion pieces, things that people are arguing. So it could be a debate online, a podcast, things like that. And then finally, method or theories, it would be things like, feminism, as I talked about, different definitions of these things, or processes, if you will. So once you know that, again, remember, it's so critical to know, how am I going to put this in? What is my reason for doing it? If you don't know when you're taking outside sources, it's going to be apparent in your writing. So it's just going to look like it's out of place, for example. So it's one thing to grab a source, right, to grab it and put it in your paper, but it's another to actually put it in your paper so the reader knows why you're doing that. So let's take a look at a couple of examples here. So in this here, okay, I have a couple of background information and then a couple of paragraphs that show how background information is being used. Okay, so you could pause and take a look at those, and then you'll just kind of notice in the highlighted area how that is all background info, and then you'll see where the sentences kind of continue to see what they're going to do with that, okay? Next is the exhibits. As I said, primary sources. We have two other types of paragraphs as well. You'll see how they're integrated in there and why they were used. So the first one is used to be analyzed, and then the second one is used to interpret. Okay, so what was my interpretation of this quote here? Again, pause to read so you can kind of understand how it's working in the body paragraph. Next, you have argumentative. So all of these three paragraphs are argumentative in nature. You have the first one that is designed to refute or argue against. The second one is to build on the knowledge. And the third is to agree with them and confirm. And you'll notice that in the different colors, you'll see how the yellow is the outside source, and then the blue and the green is telling you what you're doing with that. And it kind of walks your readers through how to process this information, okay? So now that you have that, let's take a look at how you might go through the process of actually integrating it yourself.